Alright, hello everyone. So this is a mind map of how I like to organize a variety of models that have to do with identity. I said earlier in another video, I like to think of the way you construct a worldview as creating a web of a bunch of different models. And if you have a bunch of different models, you need to organize them. So this is a way of organizing models that have to do with self-concept and the way I've organized it, if you look on the left, is with a ladder, or approximately a ladder, where they're divided into sections very roughly, uh, with at the very top, you're making the fewest distinctions between the self and another. So we have the Taoist view of everything being one integral whole. And at the very bottom, you're making more distinctions where you kind of move past identity entirely, and you are parsing through states themselves, and you're examining specific states. This is just a way of organizing a bunch of different models, and I think that organizing models has a few benefits, but let's take a quick look at a couple of the models and just talk about why they're there. So we had the section of consciousness, and this is like a more spiritual section. So you'll have Power of Now, the type of Eckhart Tolle stuff, and then Taoism, and the questions you're trying to answer with those types of models is what's the nature of experience, and then you move down to thinking of the self, and you're starting to make more distinctions that there is a self, it exists. So like you have Descartes would be a very basic form, and this is how oneself relates to the external world. uh, and then you move down and you're looking at identity, and here you're trying to not just say how you relate to yourself but describe what it is you are, right? So yourself in relation to the external world, but also self defining, and which is separating you from other people who relate to the external world. And so we have a lot of different ways of looking at it. There's the looking glass self, which involves more heavily on other individuals, and then there's like the pearl model, which you think there's like an essence of you and it's immutable, and that's less dependent on others. So it's higher up on the spectrum. And then uh, there's frame, where now you're talking about defining the self primarily through relation to others. And so you have like Hegel and Hegelian thought, where there's like a master slave dialectic, and there's dialectical movement, and it's entirely relational. And that one involves a lot of movement, so that's a little complex view. But like also Sartre's The Gaze, he talks about, what's the example? Like you're sitting in a garden, your experience of the garden is different when you think you're by yourself as opposed to when someone walks in, because now you have the sensation that you're being watched. And so those are answering questions of relation to other conscious beings, not just like trying to define yourself. And then you have below all that, and this might not even belong with the rest of them, but I put state, and that's mood and emotion. The two primary models I think about when I think about state are the cognitive view, which is the Stoic view that your evaluation of a situation precedes your emotion. So their prescription is you just change your evaluation so that bad things don't bother you. And then there's the non-cognitive view, which was put forth, I don't know if it was first by William James, but he certainly put forth a lot of ideas with it, which is that your emotions precede your evaluation, and you don't you cry and then you think you become sad because you're crying instead of like the other way around. So your emotions precede your evaluation, and they inform your evaluation. Your body reacts, and then you say, "Oh, I must be sad. Oh, I must be what have you." Okay, so this is just a way of organizing all these different models because I don't want to commit to just one model of evaluating self concept. But by organizing these, there are a few benefits. One is I can compartmentalize the views. I can hold different views and then run a situation through those views and say I'm using this model, I'm using that model, and just see what the outcomes are using different models without committing to any one of them. And by compartmentalizing, you can get just a lot more raw data. If you only think one model is accurate, then you can just run situations just through that one model. Which brings us to the second thing: is it adds flexibility. In if you're trying to evaluate something, just being able to look back at this and facilitate the use of using different models that you might not otherwise perceive or think about. This allows you to parse through information at a little bit faster rate. And also, if you find yourself using one model consistently for evaluating things, being aware that you're just using one model is useful. Even if you think that model is just superior, just being aware that you might be in a type of echo chamber, or you're just running it through the same you're running the data through the same simulation, and so you're going to get the same type of output. Just being aware helps to not get overly fixated on one model. And then this having this mental framework, right? This mind map of how to organize models relating to identity. It just gives clarity when you're thinking about the models themselves. Like before I organized them all on this spectrum of less distinctions to more distinctions, I knew all these models, but by organizing them, it helped to clarify when models are good. Because I went to the far right after doing this, and I was like, hey, if I organize them like this, I realized that each of these models are trying to answer different types of questions. Now, I have hard line divides, but I don't think it's quite a hard line divide. It's just a spectrum. Moving forward, I think that, well, first, I offer a spectrum from more distinctions to less distinctions when organizing my models based on self-concept. This is quite unnecessary. It can be any sort of it can be a different type of spectrum or a different method of organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this, and in fact, looking at multiple modes of organization is probably a good thing, because if all the reasons why organizing them like this are good, doing another one will give more flexibility just for like organizing it, and also, clarify things, and then help with compartmentalization. Another thing I thought about when I was looking at this model is the focus on mood and state. It might not be that this is best considered a ladder, it might be better considered a circle. Because when you start moving to state, you kind of, in a sense, come full circle. Focusing on state isn't that different from focusing on consciousness. The question you're trying to answer is much different, but the or it's not much different. It's actually pretty close. Like, what's the nature of experience itself, and then what's the quality of experience? It's like a similar question, and so I could think of it coming full circle. I don't think it quite works or I don't quite like it, but it's interesting. It might just be the case that state should be off to the side from self-concept and from the other four sections. But and it's more just like a way of, you're more concerned with mental state and not with how one as a self relates to others. But it's interesting to put this all down like this and organize it and think about it. I'll probably be doing more things in the future where I'm trying to organize a multitude of mental models, because identity is something I think about a lot. I know of a lot of different models for processing it. A lot of people like to just put stuff through just one mode of analysis, which I think is problematic. And I found this really interesting. Like, for example, a lot of people just like to think of everything as some sort of class struggle via like Marxist ideology. And then a lot of people like to advocate, oh, just tough it out, like the very stoic type of thing. Um, you know, when people are very resistant to change, they're just, oh, I'm just this way. They're appealing to like a Pearl model, although probably not consciously. Um, and then anyone who's trying to be spiritual is focusing on like the consciousness aspect, and just um, by organizing it like this, it helps to clarify that, and I think make processing more dynamic, which is interesting. This was like less of an exposition, I think, because I didn't talk too much about the details of these models, and more of an exploration and just talking about why it should be explored. But it's kind of a rough idea of what I have to say about this one. I'll actually probably refer to this mind map more than others just to like look at when thinking about stuff. So I think I've created a somewhat useful tool for processing stuff for myself. But I like this one. Hope anyone who's watching liked it as well.